This is Michael Cross with Unlock the Door, here for the next hour, hopefully bringing you a certain level of enlightenment about what's going on in the world today. Whether it's the evening where you're at, the early morning for those in Asia, I see that there are some people listening from there, or afternoon if you're in the United States. We will go ahead and present a very thought-provoking segment, hopefully, for you. Anyway, I've got two guests here, and they are some young men who've kind of jumped into the whole idea of alternative media. And let me see if I've got them on right now. Edvin, Alex. While we're working out the difficulties here with our guest, I wanted to basically say that if you're taking a look at what's going on in places, most recently, like in Boston, you probably noticed that there's a lot of information out there, but some of the fastest information you've been getting is actually from the alternative media. Some of the most precise information, while the big networks were coming in and contradicting themselves every 5 or 10 minutes with an update on the previous update that was the wrong update, and then giving you the new update, which in 10 minutes will be the wrong update again. The alternative media was actually bringing in a lot of good information, a lot of pictures and things, because, you see, that's the whole point with the alternative media. When people have cell phones, iPhones, they have connection to social media and so forth. We're no longer in that day when you had to have millions and millions and millions of dollars and the backing of large banks in order to set up a large network or some sort of other kind of, even newspapers required a lot of money to start them up. Now we have a situation where we not only have when we say citizen legislators, when we can go in and talk, when you can talk at a committee meeting in your state legislature or something, and you were allowed to speak and so forth. Now you are allowed to speak everywhere. You can reach the world with alternative media. And it's not just the big names out there, your Glenn Becks, your Alex Jones, and people like that. Everyone can jump in and start the process of bringing truth and information to their fellow man. And you know what? The more we do this, the less power that the concentrated corporate media is going to have. Now, I think I've got my guest on here. Let me see. Edvin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful. And Alex, are you there?
I'm here.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and begin after very confusing couple of minutes there. What I just wanted to say is, an introduction here is basically that, I just started a radio program, and I hadn't thought about really doing radio until I'd had a chance at having a lot of radio interviews, because I'd written a couple of books, the Freedom from Conscience series. There's 2 out there now, and there's going to be more coming out in the future. But then when I started doing radio, it seemed only natural that this is something that I wanted to do. And so I'm looking around, and suddenly I notice a new blog that has a lot of my radio shows listed, a lot of the podcast linked to it. And so basically I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I thought, why don't I contact these guys? Well, now I'm going to let them contact you and talk to you. And either of you can take this away, Edvin or Alex. You can go ahead. What got you into this?
Yeah.
Well, you want to talk, Edvin? You can explain.
Oh, you can begin.
Okay. Well, the thing was that we were both very interested in alternative media. We were interested in international politics and economics and stuff like that during our when we went to school together and so on. And then we felt that in Sweden there almost are no websites that reaches out to and does, alternative news. So we wanted to make one ourselves.
Hold on just a second.
Sure.
I have to ask this. Compared to the United States, you're saying that Sweden has less to offer in this area?
The thing is, we tend to criticize America for the mainstream media being like a prolonged arm of the White House and the big corporations, but Swedish media is even worse. Because we still get our news that are somewhat, truthful or with different opinions. We get them from American sources, but when we try to get different views on topics related to Sweden, we can't find them anywhere on the internet. So it's a big difference.
Mm-hmm. That must mean that pretty much everyone gets a standard line then.
Yeah, I mean, the Swedish media is, I would say it's very unilateral. It's extremely one-sided and almost exclusively left-wing, And when you look at newspapers and TV channels, they report the exact same stories, and the narratives and opinions. They don't differ from one to another, really. Mm-hmm. So you're pretty much reading one single newspaper and you're watching the same TV channel over and over again, and you hear the same news, the same agenda and everything. If you don't really have that much options online, as for instance America has a huge alternative news like sphere right now, and that's very positive. We feel it is.
Okay. Alex, you have anything to say there?
Yeah, well, as Edwin says, it's very, left-wing, and almost all the news in Sweden are, one-sided. So, because the biggest newspaper, which is Aftonbladet in Sweden, is a socialistic paper, and also one of the biggest channels, which has news and such things, are also from the, socialistic view. So, mm-hmm. all the information we get is from a socialistic view, since Sweden is kind of a socialistic country. But we want, we want liberal news, and we want other things as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially us young. Yeah, go.
Yeah, I've heard that if Barack Obama were to come and run for office in Sweden, he'd be considered a right winger.
Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Sweden's got the highest taxes in the world. Our state's got monopoly on alcohol, gambling machines. Up until a few years ago, it was the pharmacies and schools were monopolized as well. State run. So, and it is the most. We feel it's very socialistic, and there's no room for young people who are very liberty-minded. We don't really have many options. We don't have anyone to vote for. We don't have news outlets we can read, get our information from. So we tend to turn to others, to other sources, across the Atlantic. People like Ron Paul, for instance.
Mm-hmm. Ron Paul. What do people think of Ron Paul?
Well, Ron Paul, he appeals to us young people, no matter where, any country in the world. Ron Paul has followers, and especially the young people, because we tend to, do a lot of research on the internet, and we get our news from there, and that's how we came to know who Ron Paul is, and his policies and everything. Because the Swedish media was dead quiet about Ron Paul. They only reported about Barack Obama. When the American elections was presented in Sweden, Barack Obama was the only candidate in the news, pretty much, here in Sweden.
Mm-hmm. If you ask people in Sweden, our friends, what they think about the American elections, some people say, I don't care at all, which they should do because it affects them. But some people say, like, oh, I like Ron Paul because he seems like a nice guy and so on. But they don't really know anything about it. Because Obama is always featured as a cool guy. You know, he shakes hands with bums on the street, and he seems he eats at McDonald's with friends and things like that. So, but in Sweden, you don't get to know about other candidates, like Ron Paul, for instance.
And the Norwegians gave Obama the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, which we find very ironic, because he hasn't created any peace. He hasn't maintained any peace. He just recently 11 people died in a bomb raid in Afghanistan. 11 children, I think. And people in Sweden are very unaware of these things. They think that Barack Obama is the peace candidate, that he's going to make peace in the Middle East, but that's not true. That's not the case at all. And the reason they believe these things is because they only listen to, the mainstream, the newspapers like Aftonbladet, Expressen. They watch state TV. That's where they get their news from.
State TV, is it subsidized by the government?
Yeah, it is. It's called SVT, SVT1, SVT2. And you have some other channels, TV4, Channel 5. But they pretty much run the same story, all of them. So, yeah.
It's more of a mindset, actually. Because it's like a Swedish mindset. Also, people often make fun of the Swedish mindset, but in this way, it's like a really socialistic mindset. And Swedes doesn't know how left-wing it is. I've heard that, or people say that the socialistic government we had in Sweden during the 40s and 50s, if it were to be the same government today, it would be considered more right-wing than the moderate party in Sweden.
Yeah.
So okay. It's just going more to the left all the time.
And you have, well, we can get into corporatism and stuff like that, but first what I wanted to ask you about is, okay, you're two guys that are, 18 years old. You're living actually, in a country that is far away from the United States, although your website is in English. What possessed you to then decide to buck the trend, to go against the stream, and to create something to inform people out there?
We want to do something, and we want to put our time into something. We're good friends, and since we're both interested in these kind of things with politics
and everything.
Yeah, we wanted to do this. So we made this site, thelibertywall.com, and started posting things on it, wrote articles, and we still are, because we think it's fun, mainly.
Yeah, and we just got started with it, so we're definitely going to improve things and keep posting things. So we recently came to the point where we could start calling it a news site or whatever, an alternative news site. So it's something we definitely will continue doing. And we feel it's very important because, as we said, in Sweden we don't really have any options. We don't get different opinions, different views on news stories. So we have to look at other sources, and we want to share our perspectives with people, So.
Yeah, I'd really like to emphasize to people, it's called thelibertywall.com.
Yeah.
So, just go there and check the articles out and so forth. Okay, well, yeah, Alex, I cut you off there, so.
I don't really remember what I was gonna say, but we wanted to write articles. We wrote articles about almost everything. We wrote about Cyprus economics. We recently wrote about CISPA. We wrote about China and Sweden and America and different aspects of the European Union and things like that, because we wanted to get all kinds of news, because we want readers to come from everywhere to find their news, and we also want Sweden or Swedes to find news about things that are happening in the world that isn't seen from a socialistic perspective, like what they get daily.
Yeah, and the thing is, when it comes to foreign news, presented in Swedish media, the news stories were often directly copied from American or British-run news outlets, Reuters, CNN, BBC, the New York Times and so forth, and they moderated a little bit, but it's pretty much the same stories we hear, whether it's about the United States or the Middle East, and we don't get any other perspectives on it. We get the same story the American people get pretty much in their mainstream media, although we might get some comments or opinions, but it's pretty much the same thing, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I noticed you wrote an article about Mali.
Oh yeah.
And go ahead.
Oh yeah, about Mali. The thing is, we've been fed in the Swedish news that the French army is doing a great service. They're going to prevent these evil terrorists from taking over Mali and blah blah. And we haven't heard anything at all about natural resources. So the real story, why the sudden interest in Mali? We haven't heard anything about Mali for the last 5 years or ever. But now suddenly it's a terrorist stronghold where French troops must be transported immediately. And there's no criticism. There's no real story. It's just, okay, here we go. We have to help out the Malian government.
Well, it's sort of like in the United States. There was the whole Libya thing, and Obama sent weapons over. Of course, he worded it in such a way that it made it sound like NATO was forcing him to go bomb Libya, which was a pretty good stretch of the imagination in that sense. But at the same time, the thing is that the Republicans in Congress actually came out and said what he was doing was improper. But that eunuch guy that runs the Republicans, anyway, I think the whole Republican leadership in the Congress was castrated upon election day. But the thing was, they didn't do anything about it. They just said, well, you shouldn't be doing this. This violates the Constitution. And then he said, well, I'm going to do it anyway. And they're like, okay. And the media didn't pick up on this whatsoever. And they didn't point out the whole story. And then after Gaddafi was killed, they had that famous scene where Hillary's laughing about the whole thing. You didn't hear about Libya anymore. And yet, if you really examine what's going on over there now, it's kind of like a Mad Max scenario. There's militias killing each other, or taking reprisals on this group against this group, and so forth. There was black people being lynched by the so-called freedom fighters because they were perceived as being pro-Gaddafi. And nothing. It was just like after Gaddafi was dead, everything was peace, love, and flowers over there.
It's the same thing everywhere. It's the same thing in Egypt. It's the same thing, It's also.
And the thing is,
no, you can talk.
Sure. And you mentioned Mali and the rebels, terrorist rebels. Well, what about the rebels in Libya that NATO supported, that Sweden supported, sent military aircrafts and whatever? It's the same kind of terrorists, or not terrorists, but rebels fighting against the government. It was the same case in Libya, yet we supported the rebels in Libya because we didn't want Gaddafi as a puppet anymore. But it's the same type of scenario in Mali and in Syria or in Libya, but still we get totally different stories from the newspapers, especially here in Sweden, where we're considered, where the Libyan rebels are considered some kind of, freedom fighters, heroes, while the Malian rebels are terrorists. And it's all because of, natural resources, foreign policies, and people are not aware of those types of.
If you go back to, you're talking about Sweden taking news from America, for example, but the worst thing is they take news from America and they rewrite it in a really obvious way, because sometimes you can see, I don't have an example right now, I was trying to look for one, but I can't find it, but they took news, I think it was about this show, this thing, and when they write it in such an angled way that you really, very anti-Israel when you see it in the Swedish news. whilst in the American news it was more neutral or a bit pro-Israel. And they take the news, which they thought was the truth, and they make it, very anti-Israel and angle it. But it's exactly the same news, the same facts, the same source, but the way they write it is very, angled, and it's always that way with news in Sweden.
Well,
that's a big difference, because the Swedish media is very, you would say, anti-Israeli. It's very left-wing, and they're known for being pro-Palestine. And so, as Alex said, they take the same kind of news stories, but they twist and turn it a little bit to fit their agenda properly.
Well, as anyone who's ever studied rhetorics can tell you, just changing the word or the way you say a sentence can change the meaning that you're conveying. You can be telling the truth, but if you use words correctly, you give a perception in the person's mind that is basically your target, a persuasion. So therefore, yeah, it's subtle, but it works. And it explains a lot as to why people who can hear the same story think two different things. One might be an informed person who knows what it's all about, and the other person has no clue. Now, I'm going to throw something out of here, though. My wife was talking to someone the other day, and I'm not going to name what issue, but it came up, and my wife just said that, maybe there's more to this story. Maybe there is, like CIA involvement in this one particular conflict and so forth. And the person that she was talking to was just like, no, come on now, that can't be. And how do you get past that? Because I've noticed that when if you lived in a world where there was no death, and then you said, well, that death could exist, and this is the process of decay of a body, people would look at you like, what are you talking about? That can't be true. That sounds so terrible. But yet it would be the actual biological truth if one of those persons, in some way died. Do you ever find that you say something?
That's pretty common to the way the world has gone from being very religious to becoming more and more atheist and stuff. And if you watch, Sweden, there's almost, I'm not gonna say no religious people, but it's very few. And the most young people I meet today are actually atheists. And then if you would ask someone, about evolution 1,000 years ago, they would probably be very, skeptic to it, and they were. But today everyone would be in the opposite way. If you said that the evolution isn't true, they would be very skeptic to it. I think it's the same thing here. That it's slow. It's a slow process, and you have to get the news out there so people can read it and see different perspectives. And after a while, they'll get used to seeing different things. And if it will become so that they're 50-50, some news are saying that no, there's no CIA involvement, and some news are saying that there are CIA involvement, and you can read both and see what proof they have. Then you can make the assumptions and draw the conclusions for yourself.
You reminded me of a psychological term back in the 70s when they were doing all those like Stanley Milgram experiments and Stanford prison study experiments. They had an experiment where they had a professor make a very opinionated speech, which you get a lot of in university. He gave a very opinionated speech. And what they did was they put a student in the class whose job it was to argue with the professor. None of the other students knew this. And they used different classes, so they had a lot of control within the experiment. And what was interesting was that in the classes where the students, basically raised his hand and said, no, I don't believe this, and here's the reason why. Compliance, they did a survey after the professor's talk. Compliance in the classes where there was a student who disagreed went way down. I mean, it just went, there was no influence. The professor had no influence. In the classes where no one spoke, the agreement, the compliance with what the professor had believed it was remarkable. It was like, most of the students just accepted it. And it was called the dissident effect. And so that's what it sounds like you're saying, is the more people hear. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And that's why people who watch, say, for instance, Alex Jones or these types of alternative media are considered nut jobs or whatever, because they have slightly different opinions, or they get their information elsewhere other than the mainstream newspapers. And it's a huge problem here in Sweden, because Sweden is very monotonous. If you stick out, if you're just a little bit different, people consider you as an alien, pretty much. And it's the same thing with politics, and that's why we see, our left-wing party is pretty much the same as our extreme right. So, Alex, if you want to add something.
Yeah, well, the thing with Alex Jones, for example, he's very famous for being, pro-libertarian, what you call anti-gun control and such. He's very aggressive in the way he speaks, and that, I think that's not very good for his image for people that aren't so aggressive and haven't yet decided if they want to be pro or anti-gun control, for example. But sometimes you have to be aggressive, and that's probably how he got to become so famous. And as an example, if you write about alternative news, as we do, you can't write about too goofy things like too many conspiracy theories, and not too much, not talk about UFOs and such things. It doesn't matter what you believe about this, but if you start writing about such things that to many people seem extremely unlikely, not just very unlikely, but extremely unlikely, you will lose readers. And then you can argue that it's more important to have many readers and not be too extreme than have few readers and be very extreme, because you can reach out to a larger audience and therefore get your message through.
Yeah, because younger people, they're more prone to research news on the internet, and those conspiracy theories sites, or Alex Jones type of aggressive style, it may appeal to younger people, but younger people are not the problem. Really, it's the older generations, those who watch TV boxes, mainstream media, newspapers. That's the people you want to start reading these alternative news and finding out about different things. And really, that's why me and Alex, we don't expect any shifts in public opinion on really anything soon here in Sweden, because our older generations only believe one story they're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a huge problem.
That's very common. I try to get my dad, who just turned 90, to go on to the internet and sign up for the internet. And when he did, when I was visiting him, he found I showed him a site where a congressman was being interviewed about immigration, where he basically was insulting a very multi-ethnic audience. Basically saying, if you disagree with me that we should have open borders, then you're just an idiot, essentially. And I showed this to my dad. He was thinking, wow, that's really horrible. That wasn't on the news, though. And I said, yeah, well, a lot of the stuff a lot of the stuff on the internet was not on the news. But then when he showed his wife, she just said, no, if it was important, it would be on the news. So it can't be true if it's not on the news. And I think the older generation feels that way. They have a lot of trust to authority. They have a lot of trust in that box that came into their lives in the 1950s.
But that, to me, that's actually... Oh, I'm not going to interrupt you. Continue.
Oh, go ahead.
I think that's actually kind of weird in some way, because during the 60s, you had this, sexual revolution or you had all these, hippies and everybody wanted peace in Vietnam, but maybe it wasn't such big thing as as young people believe it was. Maybe the hippies were a few and a minority, because it seems like a lot of people were against the government back then, and therefore it seems odd that they're not against the government or critical against the government now.
Well, I think a lot happened. If you're dealing with the people that actually got into the whole the political, social aspects of the sexual revolutions, the ones that went after the theories of Wilhelm Reich and so forth, those people were highly educated, and to them it was a political statement. I remember reading an article a feminist wrote, and she said that a woman could not be a true feminist if she loved men. I mean, she was. It was a political type of thing, but it was usually centered in urban intellectual circles. Now, of course, the other classes of people bought into the physical aspects of the sexual revolution, but not the political, and also a lot of the other rebellions that took place. But I think a lot has to do with the fact that if you look at each generation, the generation that became adults in the 40s, they are very trusting, and even the 50s. The ones that came in the 60s are a little bit more cynical, but a lot of them are very left-wing too. They want to, the whole peace, love, and flowers. The 70s and 80s generation are the so-called Generation X, the ones that basically graduate high school in the late 70s or in the 80s. They seem to be very, they seem to be the kind of the backbone of like your Alex Jones type people and stuff that you mentioned. And then the younger people are, of course, being more exploratory too, but you've still got a huge segment of the population that's still, that box, it has to be true if it comes across.
Yeah.
And of course the young people that don't explore as well. One thing I wanted to ask you about is the 1996 Telecommunications Act. It caused a real strong concentration of news. A lot of the independent radio stations were bought up, and they went, They went to tape, to where it was just feed information, and TV stations were bought up, and media it's become concentrated. There was like 50 different media corporations in the 80s, and now there's 5.
Yeah, six corporations, I think it was, own 90% of American media.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very bad right now. And these corporations are closely linked to news and businesses in other countries, such as Sweden. Corporations such as GE, Viacom, Time Warner, Disney, Comcast. They pretty much run everything.
Mm-hmm.
So they're creating this illusion of choice for people. They think they get it's pretty much the same agenda, because these corporations, they're part of larger conglomerates which consist of other industries. And that is why medias never will present news if they portray an organization badly and that organization or company is owned by the same conglomerate as the news station. So they're biased in favor of these special interests in government, and we don't get the real, objective news stories. And people don't know about this stuff. So it's very bad.
I'm just thinking that I'm going to have you guys explain something here. I'm just thinking this. If a lot of people are doing the same thing you're doing, creating alternative news, getting information from a variety of sources so you can kind of piece together the truth, from the propaganda, then maybe a lot of people can actually win the battle out against these 6 corporations, 5 or 6 corporations. There's a couple of them that sort of are almost like, look, they kind of merge like 2 cells in mitosis or something.
Yeah. As long
Absolutely.
as long as they don't limit the internet, right?
Yeah, as long
because
as
if they
bills
limit
such
the
as
internet, if
Well, tell me, what do you
CISPA goes through, if
Okay.
CISPA goes through, they can limit the power of all alternative media and really take away the freedom of speech, freedom of, I'm not sure what it's called actually, but the freedom of printing, I'm not sure what it's called.
Well, tell me more about this, because, you know, the average person, if I go up to someone on the street in America, and probably Sweden too, and I said something about CISPA, they're probably going to think it's some sort of disease you get by drinking bad water in a foreign country.
yeah.
What, you don't see anything about CISPA on the net, on the big networks.
And that's why we need to create this sort of domino effect on the internet. That's why we posted, a little article on libertywall.com. We just wrote a little bit about it. We mention it so people can research it. They see other news stations who report the same thing, alternative news, and we get more people activated against these sorts of things. And that's the same with alternative news regarding everything, because that's why Hillary Clinton said that the U.S. is losing this media war or whatever, because platforms such as Infowars or RT or just simple alternative news sites are starting to gain a lot of viewers. So,
well, I've noticed something interesting too, and I want the audience to really keep this in mind. If you had a minister, or I don't know, minister, priest, rabbi, whatever, and you found out that he was lying, or he was committing every sin in the book, you'd never trust him anymore. Oh yeah, you would find, you would just, if he got up and told you something, you would cease to trust him. And the networks, you could find, people watching the election in this last election, should easily have seen how the networks, MSNBC, CNN, and so forth, come on. There wasn't a question about who they supported for the presidential candidate. And I think it's important that people just say, well, do I trust this source anymore? If you create question in people's minds, that is when they will break from it. And that's why I think what you're doing is great, because you're showing people that, wait a minute, no, here is information you may not have thought about.
Yeah.
I lost my question in there somewhere.
Yeah. But don't speak.
Yeah, I would basically ask then, first of all, how hard was it to really do what you're doing? Is this something that takes 24 hours a day and kills your social life?
No, not at all.
Oh, please explain, because I think a lot of people get scared about, I have a job, I go to school, I have a family. How can I do something?
We still go to school. We're in our last year, so it's much to do. We have to do exams and such all the time, but still we can do this because it's actually really easy. We set up the website, which you can do without any real knowledge about coding. You don't need to know how to do HTML codes or CSS codes. It can help to know some, but basically you can do without knowing it. And you can go to WordPress, and you can use WordPress, for example, as a station, or what you want to call it, for your website. And then you can buy a domain from one.com or something like that. You can buy your domain. We bought thelibertywall.com, which we thought was a good domain name. Well, we put a lot of thought into that, but if you want to do like microcross radio, for example, you can go there, buy your domain, and you can then proceed to set up your website on WordPress and put in your domain, so it doesn't say, microcrossradio.wordpress.com, but would say microcrossradio.com instead. And then you could just work a bit there, and I forgot one thing. You have to host your domain somewhere on a web hotel, but that's really easy to do. You can find everything about this on Google. You can just Google how to set up a WordPress site. When you have it set up, you can just start writing about what you feel to write about. That's what we did.
Absolutely. And the thing is, you don't have to know a lot about something to write it. If you write something, say for instance, about the CISPA, and the people who see your website, they will start wondering, what is this CISPA about, So they will start doing their own research, and they will find out eventually, even if you haven't posted that much about it. They saw it on your website, and they became interested, so they did their own research. So it's really, creating more skepticism in people about the mainstream media, so they can find other, news sites to get their information from. So basically what we're trying to say is you don't have to know that much about something. If you just write anything, really post anything that says this happened, blah, 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 people might look it up and they'll find out actual facts about it, and not just the official story in their mainstream media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of noticed something. This is different than setting up a website, but I mean nowadays anyone can just sit there with their whatever kind of media they use, iPhone or if they have a video camera or whatever, and they can do their own YouTube videos. I noticed something very interesting in the election. Now, I typed in something like young people support Romney, and I didn't see very much except for official stuff. But then when I did the same thing for Obama, there was a lot of YouTube videos that were like that. Now, I don't know if they were actually produced by the campaign or whatever, but when you're on a media site like YouTube, I mean that's something where everyone goes now, practically, that use the internet. And when you see 50 videos saying "Yay, Obama," there's a lot of people that are just going to say, "Okay, well maybe Obama's the guy," because there's strength in numbers. And so you're saying then that the more of these blogs and videos and stuff that people do, the more it cracks the system wide open.
Exactly.
Also,
Google. Yeah,
if you have a lot, it works kind of the way you said. I think the expression in English is many. What's it called? Many a little makes a mickle. Is it called that? Yeah. That if everyone starts making websites that goes out with alternative news and write about and have sources, because sources is important. You don't want to just say things that aren't true, because that just works against you. But if you put out this information that you can find on places, and you research it and you write an article about it, and people search for this, let's say, as Edwin said, they search for CISPA, and they will find more, and they will find our article. They will also find 10 others that says the same thing, but maybe has a different point or something like that, but still says the same thing. And then you feel that it's more true. It's the way you said that. Well, it wasn't on the news, then it can't be true. Well, but
if it's everywhere on the internet, then it must be true, right? So it's the same thing. That was the case with Ron Paul. Ron Paul campaign. You saw it everywhere on the internet, and you became curious about it. So you started doing your own research, and you found out, well, Ron Paul isn't that bad, actually. Mm-hmm. That's how we came to know about Ron Paul at all. So if a couple of guys in Sweden become interested about Ron Paul by, spotting his name somewhere on the internet. And maybe if you write about CISPA, someone sees it, he might change his opinion or just get to know more about CISPA. So it's a great way of kind of turning news against the official mainstream, how do you say it?
Well, I would remind people nowadays everything's on the internet. I really get into futurism. What's going to happen in the future. And there was this chart that I was reading from some organization that said that in predictions, what will happen such and such time and such time. And it said that the last printed book will be printed in 2040. I mean, everyone's going to be reading. They're going to be getting their literature off of the internet. Now we have iPads and so forth. The traditional way of getting information, sitting and reading a book. Newspapers are dead. I mean, they're dying. They're going away. The internet is where things are at. I think what you're doing is basically jumping on the new technology.
Yeah.
And as long as we don't get it banned, taken away from us or something, but I don't know if that's going to be possible now that so many people around the world are on the internet.
Yeah, the internet's too big to fail now, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
I have to get some more water from my throat. I will be here in 30 seconds. You can continue talking.
Okay, well, we're almost done here. I just wanted to, let's see. So basically, what's been the reaction of your friends and so forth when they read your creation?
Well, they're impressed by it. I don't think they were expecting it. I think a lot of people have become more interested in what me and Alex, what we discuss on a daily basis. Events globally, politics, and so forth. And they found out that it's what they hear on the TV channels in their newspapers is not always the case. And so we've definitely opened a lot of eyes, I think, with just a couple of articles on our website. And we've just started. This is just the start. We're going to, as soon as we learn more about, how to really make the website look, professional, start getting more people on interviews and so forth. So it's anyone can do it. I mean, it doesn't have to be something professional. It could just be a blog or whatever. What's important is that it's out there for anyone to read.
I noticed that you actually had Paul Craig Roberts.
Oh, yeah.
With him on your blog.
Yes. Yeah, we knew about Paul Craig Roberts. We've seen a lot of his articles on InfoWars, other sites. We've seen YouTube videos of him on RT, talking about Libya, and so on. And we simply sent him a mail request asking if he could answer a couple of questions, and he said, okay, I'll do it. So we sent him the questions, and a couple of days later we got the answers from him. We put it up on our website, and it actually attracted a lot of viewers, because when we say, okay, we got Paul Craig Roberts on our website, and we just started doing the website, so it gained a lot of attention, and a lot of people read the website.
Well, if you ever want to do a book review, let me know here.
Yeah, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. My girlfriend actually read your book.
Oh, The Freedom from Conscience, the first one.
Yeah, the first one, exactly. I haven't read it yet. I think I'm gonna do it actually. I'm not much of a reader, but if I take time, I might borrow it from her and read it.
Oh, well, feel free to.
Because she liked it, so.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, people do things that they never were expecting. If someone had told me a few years ago I'd have started writing fiction, I would have said, yeah, right. And, I think there's people listening right now who are probably saying, no, this just isn't for me. I couldn't do this. I just can't do it. I think hearing you two, it's been very, very inspirational that maybe if there's a few people out there who are listening to the show now or will hear it later on a YouTube video, that they're going to think, yeah, maybe I'll give it a try. So hopefully that'll happen. What do you want to say to sum things up? We have 1 minute.
Please check out our website and, follow us. Go in a few times if you want to read about American news and international economics and things like that from a different angle, and try to read more. TheLibertyWall.com, yeah, remember that, and try to read other sources as well, not just ours, because it's good.
And don't believe everything your government tells you. Don't believe what the mainstream media says. Look it up by yourself on the internet. You'll find out a lot about a lot of stuff, and you'll start questioning your government. That's actually very good, because there's not enough of it right now.
No.
Well, you watch history documentaries on World War II and that era, and they point out all of the things that they were doing behind the scenes that no one knew about. And what will they be talking about 40 years from now that the government was doing that no one knew about?
We have WikiLeaks now. That's good.
Well, unless the unless they or find a way to get Assange.
Yeah. Well, we know that there's a lot of things that aren't the way the media tells, and since we do know that it is this way, everybody knows this, then you should continue looking up things like this. A lot of conspiracy theories about 9/11, but look up other things as well. That's what I will end on. Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting us be here. I mean,
hey, no problem. I think people would be really shocked if they knew just how much disinformation and outright manipulation takes place out there in a lot of different areas, not just the media, but in education, in government, in many different areas. And the more you know, I think the less it'll affect you. Well, sounds like it's time to end, so please go check out libertywall.com and leave some comments there. And hope you tune in next week for Unlock the Door. Thank you.